Alright, Exiles and Wanderers, today I want to talk to you guys quickly about the launch of Path of Exile 2. It seems very clear that in the next coming days or weeks there's going to be a lot of chatter about why Diablo 4 players should kind of stay away from Path of Exile 2. Being that both of these games are direct competitors to some degree, it's always fun to compare the games and it's always fun to poke fun at one or the other. And while I did definitely contemplate making a video very similar to those because obviously they would get significantly more views in a positive video like the one I'm hoping to make today, I decided against that and want to talk to my Diablo 4 players because, as you probably have noticed on the channel early on, I myself covered a lot of Diablo 4. For clarity, I have always been a long time Path of Exile player starting back in 2013, but as my start as a creator, I really did put a lot of effort into the launch of Diablo 4, and for good reason. It is very casual friendly and a lot of my friends actually really like the game, so it made a lot of sense for me to cover. With that in mind, Path of Exile 2 is coming out in a couple of weeks, early access on the 15th of November, and a lot of you guys who are coming over from Diablo 4 who remind me of my friends who still continue to play are once again interested in jumping into Path of Exile 2 and want to know a bit of information. While I do love Path of Exile significantly more than I do Diablo 4, above all, I am a gaming content creator who enjoys all types of ARPGs, and it is more important in my opinion to actually bring the community together rather than try to pick it apart. And that's exactly what I plan to do in this video, so let's dive right on in. So let's talk about one of the most important key elements, and that is characters. Now, from the chatter that I've seen thus far, and this is not confirmed, there's 8 playable characters that we're going to be experiencing in the early access, with the 4 remaining coming a little bit later. And so we're going to have quite a few characters to play. Now, if you are a Diablo 4 player and you never played Path of Exile, I'm going to quickly go over the differences in characters compared to that of Diablo 4. First off, as I said, you're going to have access to 12 characters. Each character has the ability to ascend to different type of characters. Without being too specific, some ascendancies can morph the character in a way that can be drastically different from how they play. Someone who is a melee focused character can drastically change to a spellcaster playstyle. Someone who's a spellcaster can become a very tanky character that's unkillable. And even characters that you expect to be roguish in nature become these really cool trickster type characters that can use a blend of magic and mobility. Ascendancies is something that really morph the characters in very different ways, and it feels, in my opinion, one of the most important elements of Path of Exile that you don't see in Diablo 4. And this is going to be something a lot of players who are coming from Diablo 4 has to get accustomed to, because there is some planning that is required when you play these classes. Next, let's talk about passives and skills. In Diablo 4, you have a very simplistic tree that is fairly easy to navigate. In a lot of cases, I find a lot of the passives and the skills to be very on the rails, and in that simplicity, you generally pick a lot of the same things. In Path of Exile, that is very different. At the moment, there are 1,500 individual different type of passives. These passives can be used by every single character if they choose to. That doesn't mean you have access to all of them because there is a limitation on how many points you have. Now, this passive tree is pretty massive. You're probably seeing it on screen now, and it is very intimidating for a lot of Diablo players. I think it's intimidating for pretty much any player, and this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest barrier to entry for a lot of players because, again, it's a very big passive tree that you can freely use. I will say though, when it comes to the passive tree, while it is pretty massive, there is some simplicity to it that you will eventually learn as you continue to play the game. For example, I play a lot of melee focused characters in any game I play, and that's no different in Path of Exile. Generally speaking, I'll go towards life nodes, some type of damage specifically to the weapon that I try to use. You'll get some type of defense like resistance, evasion, armor, or usually a combination of all those things, and some type of lifesteal for sustain. And depending on your melee style, you may go things like rage and or suppression to keep yourself alive or do more damage. And generally speaking, characters who are similar to this will generally follow a very similar path. As someone who plays Zerker, you will very seldomly ever see me go towards the magic based stuff because, generally speaking, I am a melee based character who likes to use a lot of physical damage, so there's no reason for me to go to the spellcaster stuff. So while the tree is pretty massive and there's a lot of things on it, generally speaking, you'll be able to understand it as you play more because a caster is very likely not going to go run to the melee section and get a bunch of axe skills Of course, there's going to be situations where that change, but what I'm trying to get at is while the passive skill tree can be a little overwhelming, there is a method to the madness. In the same vein, this actually extends to skills. There are over 700 skills in Path of Exile. Every single skill you have access to using. If you are someone who is a warrior-based character, you want to use some type of magic-based fireball skill, you absolutely can do that if you desire. And that's something a lot of Diablo 4 players are going to have to get accustomed to, because again, you have that on the rails experience where everything is kind of laid out for you. Again, this is not a fault of Diablo 4. I actually like this design because sometimes I do want to casually play, but this is going to be something that you as a player who is coming over from Diablo 4 have to get accustomed to in Path of Exile 2. Next thing I want to talk about is boss fights, because this is a very significant change than what you see in Diablo 4. In Diablo 4, a lot of the bosses are very telegraphed and a lot of cases very simplistic. I don't find them to be very mechanically challenging, but when you jump into something like Path of Exile, even some of the more simplistic bosses, not even like the super uber unique ones, will have mechanics way more intricate than some of the in-game Diablo 4 bosses, and in almost no cases are anything telegraphed. Honestly, while I'm saying this now, I can't think of anything that's telegraphed in Path of Exile, so I expect this to translate over to Path of Exile 2, which from the footage that we've seen so far, that seems to be the case. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because, again, in Diablo 4, a lot of things are telegraphed and it's fairly easy to understand. I'm a very adventurous player. I really love when things are challenging and very difficult, and that is something that you're going to get a lot of in Path of Exile if that's something you're looking forward to. As of what I know right now, there are over 100 unique bosses available in Path of Exile 2, which is really awesome to see. And as you've probably seen in a lot of the background footage, each of them have some very unique playstyles, mechanics, and things that they do. And honestly, while it does look overwhelming, I think it's going to be really fun to try out, especially as a player who is coming from Diablo 4 where the bosses are more simplistic. Next, I want to talk about itemization, because this is going to be something that is completely different from Diablo 4 in various ways. Now, again, I have not seen how itemization has fully worked in the in-game, as very few people have very likely played it, maybe like a handful outside of the GGG circle, but here's how itemization works in Diablo 4 compared to Path of Exile. In Diablo 4, generally speaking, unless you're leveling, you're almost only looking for uniques and or legendary items, because generally speaking, rare magic and common gear has zero value outside of gold fodder. In Path of Exile, that's not the case, and in a lot of cases when it comes to the best in slot gear, it is going to be rare pieces of gear that the player themselves generally have crafted. The uniques, in my opinion, in Path of Exile, I would say about 75% of them are pretty damn garbage. I mean, they're situational. They're not garbage, they're situational. And then 25% are generally good, with 5% of them being almost always good on quite a few builds. I'm not sure if that's a flaw, but in my opinion, that is something very different, because generally speaking in Diablo 4, rares are really the bottom of the barrel. In Path of Exile, when you craft your own rare gear, that is the top-notch type of gear. So that's a really drastic change that you'll have to adjust to. The last and final thing I want to talk about in this video, because I do think this is something that a lot of Diablo 4 players need to be aware of, is that there are a lot of league mechanics that are available in the game. Very similar to the seasonal system in Diablo 4, there are league systems in Path of Exile, and generally speaking should be carrying over to Path of Exile 2. For reference, there have been, at this point, as of what I'm looking at right now, 40 different league mechanics that have come and go, with a lot of them carrying over to becoming a full-fledged mechanic available in the game. There's some very simplistic ones like ambush and invasion, where you would in theory open a box but will summon monsters that you will have to kill in order for it to properly open. You can use your currency to upgrade it into like different type of ways to make it more powerful and be more rewarding. Kill the monsters and you get a ton of loot. Where on the other end, there are way more intricate systems like Betrayal, which I really don't want to explain in this video, but because how convoluted it can be at times, with your ultimate goal trying to understand who is at the very top while unlocking really cool items that can be unveiled. Again, this is a very intricate system that requires in a lot of cases 3-hour videos to explain. Thank you, Zizarin. But ultimately, that's something that Diablo 4 players will have to, get familiar with, because there's no telling what is going to transfer over from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2. And there are a lot of systems that should be carrying over that you have to get familiar with all at once to some degree. Now, I don't want to touch on league mechanics too much more because I think you guys understand what I mean by this. There's a lot of systems you need to catch up on. But ultimately, these are the things that, in my opinion, are going to be the most difficult things for Diablo 4 players to adjust to. And I really hope players who are coming over from Diablo 4 have a better understanding of what to expect from the launch of Path of Exile 2. The game can be a little bit intimidating, but there's a lot here. And honestly, there's going to be a lot of great creators, not only from the Path of Exile community, but plenty coming over from the Diablo community who's going to be teaching you a lot of this stuff. So I would highly implore you to give the game a real shot. Keep in mind, I will be one of those creators who's going to be giving you a lot of tips, tricks, builds, and all that kind of stuff that comes with Path of Exile 2. Consider subscribing to the channel because, again, I'm going to be doing my due diligence as a creator to give you guys the best information possible. Hopefully this video did you some justice, and I'll see you guys in the next Path of Exile 2 video very soon.